I need this moment here for a second. I'm a little emotional right now. Yeah. It's a big deal to me. I know it's just the biggest part of my life right now that I need to get in order. And I'm here. I'm ready. I know this is my path. I know this is awesome. I'm excited. I was getting shut up the whole way here. I was like, 9 o'clock at night, I'm going to church. I'm ready. I'm excited, and I just, it's like you said, you never had a choice when you were a kid. Now you're here and you're making your own decision, and yeah, I'm never going to regret this. I know that. I'm ready. I'm ready.
You believe Jesus is who he said he was?
I do.
When you get up the cross?
I do.
It's crazy. And then he rose again.
I do.
He destroyed death. He destroyed sin. So that you can live. So he died. Let's do this. It's my honor. Well,
Do I need to? Or can I breathe underwater?
you bet.
I'm a swimmer.
All right. You
Okay.
need to.
Okay.
Based on your confession, it's my honor to walk with you as a brother.
Love it. Amen.
First we die. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Big deal for you too. Jesus is who he said it was. He died on the cross for your sins.
Yes.
You believe he rose again from the dead?
Yes.
She's all yours, my friend.
Did you know your breath?
Yes. But turn around.
Which way do you want me to go? Huh?
I don't care, whatever.
Ready?
What are you seeing? What are you seeing? Growing in God's greatest commands and commission. And what are those commands? That you would love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. That's the most important relationship that any one of us will have, is our relationship that's vertical with our Creator. And then to love others as ourselves. And love others the same. That's the horizontal. So what are you seeing? I've asked Chuck and Bernice to come on up. We're going to play a little game. Why don't you guys come on up here? Give them a round of applause. If you don't know Chuck and Bernice, I'll explain it to you. This is going to be fun. Bernice is very apprehensive, just saying. She's like, what am I getting myself into? And I would not tell her. Bernice, why don't you have a seat here? Why don't you face that way? That way. Oh, now you're starting to figure it out, aren't you? Chuck, that way. Now, in case you don't know, this is mother-in-law, son-in-law relationship, which I absolutely love kind of poking fun at sometimes, because I have the world's best mother-in-law. She's watching online, so I can get away with that stuff. And I know that these two have a great relationship too. So what we're going to do is we're going to see what you're seeing. All right? So I have a series of questions I'm just going to ask. And actually, we could do crowd participation too, and they can ask. We'll start with Chuck. Chuck, what is your mother-in-law wearing today? Oh, you know what? I need a microphone. Sorry. Let me get that. I know what you're trying to do.
Okay, my mother-in-law has on a pair of dark slacks and a jacket with a flowery print.
With what?
A flowery print.
Wow, that's really good. What color is that flower print?
I believe the jacket is dark blue and the flowers are red and yellow.
Nicely done, Chuck.
Judging by
What's that?
Judging by Randy's laugh,
All right, Bernice, your turn. You want to describe Chuck?
He usually wears
I
tan.
meant his personality.
Oh, his personality.
I'm kidding. You can describe what he's wearing.
I believe he has on a yellow shirt that has kind of little diamonds or something or other in it. And he has tan slacks, I believe.
Very good. Very good. All right, let's really get nitty-gritty. Which side is his wristwatch on?
I believe on his right hand.
Okay. I can't really indicate because I'm playing poker with you right now, all right? I can't let you know. All right, very good. So, as you think about Bernice and what she wore today, I noticed as she came in that she has a pendant on her collar. Did you notice that same pendant?
No.
No? You don't get to play anymore. Consistently with Chuck, as he comes in, he has his cell phone to church. I don't know if you've noticed that or not. He uses an OtterBox, if I'm not mistaken. I remember seeing that about 3 or 4 years ago. And I think he still has the same OtterBox with the same case around his phone. Can you describe the case?
I don't think I can. All I can see is that it might be black.
Okay. Now, I'm not around by Chuck, and just notice, I asked you when we went and did greeting time, right? So it's not like I paid specific attention to you and thought about these questions, but I'm going to try to describe the box, the OtterBox, if I'm not mistaken. I think it's like a hunting orange camouflage OtterBox, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, it is. All right, very good. Here, one more, and then we're gonna have some. We're gonna give you guys a round of applause. All right. So your mother-in-law is also wearing a wristwatch and some jewelry. Can you describe the jewelry she's wearing?
Oh, I didn't notice that closely, but she usually has a bracelet and her wedding ring on.
She has what?
A bracelet and her wedding ring on.
Bracelet and her wedding ring. So the takeaway lesson with this, Chuck, would be you need to pay more attention to your mother-in-law. Why don't you guys turn around and see how you guys did, how you fared.
That wasn't dark.
You did pretty good.
It wasn't blue, it was red. I'm just saying. Why don't you guys give them a round of applause? I appreciate your volunteer. That's awesome. That's fantastic. Sometimes the power of observation can be a difficult exercise. It's one that we're not used to, and maybe it's because we're so self-absorbed. Maybe it's because all that we think about is ourselves at times. But I've learned to notice people in my life. And there have been games that we've played with our family where, we'll be going down the highway or whatever it would be, and I'll have my kids close their eyes and describe what mom's wearing, describe what dad's wearing, describe what one of their siblings is wearing. It's just kind of fun to challenge your students and challenge your children and challenge even your spouse or your mother-in-law to pay attention to those around them and see how well they do. And if you haven't done that as a family, that's just kind of a fun exercise. Mandy and I had the benefit, or have the benefit this weekend, of watching a close couple's friend or children this weekend. They're on the Weekend to Remember event that's happening in Des Moines, and they've got a couple of twin girls. Their names are Pemberly and Paisley. We love hanging out with the twin girls. They're a lot of fun. And last night, we were sitting around the dinner table, and we were eating, and Paisley says, "Hey, let's play What's Missing." I'd never heard of What's Missing, so instantly I'm intrigued. And basically what happened was she said, "Okay, now everybody close your eyes. So everyone closes their eyes, and she removes an item from our dining room table. And she puts it underneath the table, and she says, okay, what's missing? And so the first one to discover what was missing gets to go next. It's just a fascinating game. It's a lot of fun. It brings a lot of laughter. These are just little exercises that help condition our minds to really pay attention to each other. And last week, when we talked about face-to-face and the power of face-to-face, one of the things that we really camped on, pun intended, was Moses' relationship with God. And we found that in Exodus chapter 3, when he first encounters God in the burning bush, Moses' position and posture was very humble. He throws it says in Scripture in Exodus 3, it says that he throws his face to the dirt. And he says, I cannot look at you. I am ruined. I'm going to die. I can't see God. But then later in chapter 33, after some major conflict, this is after the Israelites had created this golden calf, he comes down the mountain and he confronts the people. He goes back up to the mountain, and it says right before that segment, right before that storyline, that Moses would often meet with the Lord in the tent. And we learned some very valuable lessons in this chapter in Exodus 33. And what's it mean for him to meet in the tent? And it was more than just meeting with God in the tent. It said that he would speak to God like a friend would face to face. And there's intimacy that's applied or implied in this verse. And some of the lessons that we learned last week as we were looking at Moses' relationship with God, which is very much parallel with our relationship with God, is for us to really connect with our Creator, sometimes we have to leave our camp. And as we leave our camp, we kind of have to go by ourselves at times. I mean, it's okay to take Joshua with you or take a friend with you, but you have to enter the tent by yourself. This is a personal relationship that you have with the Creator, not a grandfathered relationship that you have because of your mom and dad or your brother or sister or aunt and uncle. This is a relationship with you and the Creator. A couple other lessons that we learned from Moses as he went into the tent is that if you spend any time at all with Jesus, it will change you. The other thing that we learned is that you cannot have 20/20 vision when you're hanging out with God. He will slowly reveal himself to you. So if you're in a relationship right now and you've felt kind of like there's these hidden things and these hidden mysteries about who God is, that's normal, that's natural. But perhaps the most important lesson that I think we learned and that I'm learning and continue to remember from Moses' encounter with God is this: that God has a way of using people and using problems to bring us to his tent. It's only in those moments where I'm just so frustrated with what's going on that I want to go to Jesus. I want to go to God, and I want to say, what gives? What's going on? How can I do this differently? What lesson do I need to learn? And it's those people and those problems sometimes that God uses as a catalyst to push us inside the tent so that we might fall on our face before Jesus. So we might come face to face with some of the lessons that we need to learn. But as we go to the tent, maybe it's because of people, maybe it's because of our problems, our time in the tent is limited because we have to go back to those people and those problems. That's the greatest lesson that I learned from Moses last week. Now, if I apply that lesson in my life, there are significant parallels. And I'm going to share a part of my story, part of my history that you might not have ever heard. Mandy and I are celebrating 20 years of marriage in May. That's when we were married May 30th? Just kidding. May 30th, 1998. And this year's our 20-year anniversary. And shortly after Mandy and I were married in Mason City, in July, we moved to Omaha, Nebraska, where Mandy could become a massage therapist. She went to the Omaha School of Massage Therapy, and I transferred to a university at Omaha called Grace University. Now, you've got to remember where I'm from. I am from rural, small-town America, Missouri, all right? There are not a lot of people where I'm from. The population at the time was about 2,200, and the demographic of Unionville is 100%, I think it was like 99.89% white. So we moved to Omaha, Nebraska, and I start to experience culture shock because I was completely disoriented on where we lived, where our schools were, where our work was. I was lost. like you wouldn't believe. And it took me about a month or so to get acclimated just geographically with our area. And I started to learn, which isn't that different from a lot of other cities in America, there are sections of the city. Right? So on the southeastern quadrant of Omaha, it seemed to be a heavy Hispanic area. On the southern tip of Omaha, it seemed to be kind of your lower income white. That's where we lived. And then over on the northwest side of Omaha, you had kind of the rich neighborhood. But on the northeast side of Omaha was this specific area they called Death Valley. And the reason they called it Death Valley, it was predominantly a black community. And the reason they called it Death Valley is there's an intersection right beside their Burger King that every weekend they would have, on average, 4 to 5 murders or drive-bys or shootings in this area. And about a block and a half away from this Burger King was a YMCA. And so, like many college students who are going to Bible college, you need to kind of find a ministry. And I did the church thing, and I did some children's ministry stuff while we lived in Omaha for that year. But about 4 months into our time in Omaha, something changed with that occupation. I knew that really wasn't where God was leading me. In fact, I was also an assistant manager at Golden Corral, and that changed. And so suddenly I was left with this kind of quandary. What do I do? Where do I go? Where do I serve? How do I complement both the financial, economic demands that I have and maybe perhaps find a ministry related to those things? So I applied at this place called the YMCA, not knowing anything about the demographic. And as I drive into the northeast side of Omaha, which is predominantly black, I have my black Ford Ranger 1984 with the gun rack in the back and a cowboy hat back there. No joke. Windows are down. I've got my arm out. I've got my ball cap on. And I pull up to this stoplight. And there's a couple of gang members, a couple of brothers who are sitting there bouncing in their tricked out car. Well, I noticed right away I wasn't in Kansas anymore. And I kind of thought, I wonder how this is going to go. So I have my arm out, and I see them, and they're bouncing, and I look down, and they look up, and I just do what comes natural. Hey, what's up? And they lost it. They thought that was the funniest thing in the world. And they knew this white boy wasn't where he was supposed to be. I was on my way to the job interview at the YMCA. I walk into the YMCA, and immediately I notice I'm the only white dude there. The only white, and I'm wearing cowboy boots and, pants and big old belt buckle, and hey, I'm here for my job. What? And I started to develop this relationship with these community members that I just fell in love with. Basically what I did was some after school daycare. We did a lot of events and, planning activities, and just started to love on these kids and love on my coworkers and love on this community. And I'll never forget, there was one, I'm not very good at basketball, and you can come on Monday night and see if I'm not very good at basketball, but it's true, I'm not. I'm more of a football guy. But I tried to play basketball. I tried to be all things to all men, and that was one of the ways I tried to do that. And on the basketball court, I was gassed one day because there was this one guy that I was playing against. His name was Damien, and Damien, his nickname was D for short. Great basketball player. He's kind of short. He's vertically challenged, but he was a good basketball player, good ball handler. And I was just getting my tail handed to me. So I'm sitting on the sidelines, and this little black girl comes up. She's got the dreads, down. She's cute as button. She's sitting on my lap. And, I've got shorts on, and so she starts kind of messing with my leg hair. Whatever, and not a big deal, I guess. And back then, I didn't have the beard. I had a goatee, and it was a lot more, it was kind of like Josh DeBrien's beard. It was like really bright and red. Okay, age has a way of changing some of those things. But this little girl, she grabs a hold of my chin, and she just starts pulling on the hair. And I'm kind of going, okay, this is weird. I let it happen. And I said, what's up? And she goes, are you made of gold? I went, what? No, I'm not made of gold. It was the first white guy that she'd ever really messed with in their beard. And so she was having fun, I was having fun. And I could tell that through the remaining months that I would have in Omaha, about 6 or 7 months, there was kind of this weird distance between me and Dee. D was the only other guy in the gym, and he and I would play ball together. And I tried to be kind, I tried to be friendly to him. You know, Mo, which is Monica, I mean, we had a good relationship, and my boss and I, we were good, but something was off with D. And I had been there, like I said, about 4 months, 5 months, and all of a sudden, D grabs me after work one night, and he goes, "Hey, what are you doing tonight?" And I said, "I don't know. Why? Would you come over to my apartment?" "Sure. Mandy's at school. I don't mind." So I go to D's apartment, and he said, "Do you want anything to drink?" "No, I'm good." "Well, I'm going to watch a movie. Do you want some popcorn?" "Sure, I'll take some popcorn." And then I had a glass of water with that, too. So we're sitting down on this couch, which is kind of dark, and we've got quilts up for drapes, and we're hanging out. And I don't know what movie we're watching. I have no idea why I'm at Dee's apartment. And all of a sudden, Dee puts in this movie called American History X. I don't know if you've ever heard of this movie or not, but it's about a white supremacist. Edward Norton is the main character. It's very dark. It's very violent. It's very difficult to watch. And at this point, I'm not only I'm not scared really. I'm nervous, but I'm thinking, what is this all about? I'm really lost. And at the end of the movie, Dee comes up to me. He's got tears in his eyes, and he's just going through it. And the movie is all about this. It's basically this white supremacist who hates blacks, and he was a part of a gang that dedicated themselves to destroying blacks. And there's this violent scene at the beginning, and he gets put in jail. And the reason he got put in jail was to go help his brother, to defend his brother. And it's been a while since I've watched the movie. I only watched it the one time. But while he's in prison, he connects with another black inmate. And the white supremacist brothers that he thought he had actually turned on him and started to abuse him while he was in prison. And so Edward Norton starts to realize that maybe the prejudices that he grew up with were not exactly what he should have been growing up with. That the people he hated, the people who were on the margins, are the people that maybe he should have been paying a little bit more attention to and not hating. And so at the end of the movie, it's basically violence begets violence, begets violence, begets violence, and you could see this spiral. And the movie closes with this weird ending. And go watch it sometime if you want to, just be warned. At the end of the movie, he says, "This is us." I said, "What?" "Yeah, this is us." He said, "Steve, I've hated you since the first time I saw you. You see, my niece, about 6 months before I met you, was raped and killed by 2 white guys. And I've been trying to get to jail so I can kill them." And he said, "But it's different with you. I don't know why, but you're different. It's like when I see you, I don't see white. I see a brother." I said, "Dee, that's all I see too. You and I are the same, moving through life. There's not a race issue. I just had never been exposed to other races. But, man, I'll tell you guys, the reason I'm telling this story is because this is such a critical, important thing for us to discuss, not simply because of the people on the margins, but because of the people who aren't necessarily on the sidelines, but maybe they're right beside us. Right? It doesn't matter if you're black, white, Hispanic, it doesn't matter. Who are the people that God has surrounded you with? Who are the people that you're working with? Who are the people that's near you that you get to be Jesus to them? And that's the power of what I learned while I was in North O. When I left, it was a sad day. Dee and I still stay in touch. We still call each other. We have it in the plans to go have lunch someday. He's really into barbecue, which is kind of fun. But when I left, my nickname was the White Brother, which I thought was just really kind of cool and such an honor. And I've absolutely loved that experience, and I've drawn off of that experience with people. You know, there are people that I've come across, that I've encountered, people that I've even learned about who live in the margins. They're touching the untouchable, they're loving the unlovables, and we can learn a lot from their example if we pay attention, if we open our eyes, if we listen with our eyes and not just with our ears. if we see people with our ears and not just with our eyes. Shane Claiborne wrote a book, Irresistible Revolution. It's one of my top 10 books that I would recommend. It's a really good one. It's kind of old at this point, but there's a part in this where he was really disenchanted with the church. He had grown up in Illinois and in Chicago, and the Methodist church that he was a part of spent $100,000 on a stained glass window, and he could not fathom the waste of resources and funds for that type of spend. And so he went on this soul-searching expedition where he just wanted to find what faith was all about. He literally called Mother Teresa while she was still alive in Calcutta. And he spent some time with her in Calcutta, helping the lepers, touching the untouchable, loving the unlovables. And he called her up and he said, "I'd like to come work with you, Mother Teresa." And she said, "Okay, well, come." "Well, just come. What do I need to pack? Just come." I mean, every answer was just come. Just come. Stop worrying about the details. Just get over here. We could use your help. Come on, come. And so he ended up just going, and he writes about that experience. And I just want to read a section of the book because I think it really speaks well to this. But in his experience with the lepers in Calcutta, he writes right before this that there isn't a word for thank you in this community because the lepers haven't really had an opportunity to use that word. They don't even comprehend the word because people aren't touching them. People aren't loving them. So this concept of being thankful and grateful is really foreign to them. So he writes, "Most days I would go to a clinic run by the lepers who became doctors. And a line would form as people waited to be treated. The doctors would lay out a huge pile of cotton about 4 feet high, and my job was to roll cotton balls for them as they cared for one another." Can you imagine the pain and the misery and just the skin infections that he was touching here? This is kind of mind-boggling. I would watch intently, fascinated by their love and compassion. One afternoon, as things were winding down, one of the doctors had to leave early, but there were a few patients still waiting to be seen. He looked at me and emphatically said, "You know how this works. You've been watching a while. It's your turn." Startled, I stared back at him and I said, I stared at him. I had been watching, and I did know what to do, but I wasn't sure I dared touch. I came forward and I sat in the doctor's seat, and I began staring at the next patient's eyes. And the decision had already been made. I began carefully dressing the man's wounds. He stared at me with such intensity that it felt like he was looking into my soul. Every once in a while, he would slowly close his eyes. And when I was finished, he said to me that sacred word that I came to love in this community, "Namaste." I smiled with tears in my eyes and whispered, "Jesus." See, namaste was their only word for thank you. And what it meant in their community was, "I see Jesus in you." So I smiled with tears in my eyes and I whispered, "Jesus." He saw Jesus in me, and I saw Jesus in him. I remember thinking back to that stained glass window my United Methodist Church bought for over $100,000. I saw a clearer glimpse of Jesus in this leper's eyes than any stained glass window I could ever see. I knew that I had not just looked into the eyes of some pitiful leper in Calcutta, but I had gazed into the eyes of Jesus. That he had not seen just some rich, do-gooder white kid from America, but that he had seen the image of God in me. And that is nuts. What would the world look like if we truly believed what the Apostle Paul had figured out? That we no longer live, but only Jesus lives in us. In Galatians 2:20. There's another guy on the fringe. There's another guy that's living in the margins, and his name is Gregory Boyle. If you've read any of his work, he has a couple of TED Talks that you can look at. He's kind of questionable as far as some of his worldviews, but he has some really good things to offer. And one of the things that he really does is he touches those who are untouchable. He sees those who are unseeable. He loves those who are unlovable in a very unique and fascinating way. His whole ministry, which is based in Los Angeles, is to help bring gang members out of the gangs. And so he's around a lot of rough characters, and he introduces them to Jesus. In the book that I just read, called Barking to the Choir, which is kind of a neat read, he said in the book, somebody asked him once, when does he first introduce Jesus to these people? And the answer to this question was this: never and immediately. I really like that idea. He doesn't go with the approach of trying to convert or change these people. He just goes and he's Jesus to these people, and they see Jesus in him. But he writes in Barking to the Choir this statement that I thought was so good, I wanted to make sure that I'd said to you. He said this, that we are sent to the margin. We are sent to the margin not to make a difference, but so that the folks on the margin will make us different. Why do you serve people? Why do you see people? The reason that we see people isn't so that you might change them. It's so that you might find Jesus, because it's only in looking at others sometimes that we're able to really truly see Jesus. Jesus even said this. He said, when he separated them and he said, you did not care for me, you did not give me food, you did not give me clothing, they asked Jesus, well, when did we see you? What you did to the least of these, you did to me. And there are people who are living on the margins, who are living on the edge, who are living on the sidelines of humanity and touching those who are untouchable. But we don't have to live on the sidelines for this principle to be embraced. Sometimes it's those people who are right beside us that we need to encounter and engage the most. Sherry Turkle, who is she's an MIT professor, she had this TED Talk. She also has written this book that I want to recommend. It's called Reclaiming Conversations, The Power of Talk in a Digital World. She talks about the power of face-to-face communication. And when you first hear her, you think that she's kind of this person who's anti-tech, and she's really not anti-tech, but she does a lot of statistics. And one of the things that I found in her research that I thought was just fascinating, just a couple of quick stories and high points, is that on average, primary kids, this is 0 to like 5 and 6 years old, spend about 4 to 5 hours in front of a screen every day. Okay, so elementary students to secondary students spend about 7 to 8 hours in front of a screen every day. And she believes that our phones and our technology that we're embracing in our world today, it not only is changing what we do, but it's actually changing who we are. And she goes on to kind of make her case, and she says, listen, 20 years ago, some of the examples of what happens in our world today would have never been heard of. But because of the tech age that we live in, it's really changing who we are. And she goes on to say that students now are, Facebooking, and they're posting, and they're putting things on Twitter, and they're shopping while they're in class. That would have been unheard of 20 years ago. Another thing that she goes on to say is that 20 years ago, you would have never heard of a person in a corporate board meeting ever bring their computer to the office, ever send emails, ever do research, ever kind of engage on the tech world, because they're engaging in face-to-face dialogue in the corporate meeting. But now, it's very common in the workplace. In fact, we do it in our staff meetings today, where people bring in the laptops and we have that easy access and information. And what that creates is what she said, control, and it's an illusion of control for us. She said that when we bring in our tech stuff to our meetings, basically what we're telling the people around us is, I'm going to control when I engage in this conversation and when I'm not. That's interesting, isn't it? When you go to meetings, do you have your cell phones out? Are you researching stuff? Are you texting? Are you sending emails? Or are you know what, I'm going to pen and paper this thing? Guys, these are just practical things that technology has changed us with. It's just true. It's just happened. 5 years ago, a funeral director in Kimball, Minnesota, while he was closing the casket, his cell phone went off. And it was a pretty weird ringer. I think it's been consistently for the last month that I've heard a cell phone go off during the sermon. It's changing who we are. It's changing our behavior. Suddenly, some of you guys are like, oh, shoot, did I forget to turn that off? Maybe. Maybe you did. The point that she's trying to make is technology is really just it's changed us. She said that she had this conversation with a student one time, and I wrote this down, I thought this was so good. She said, the student said to her, someday, but certainly not today, I would like to learn from you how to have a live conversation. And she said, what? What do you mean a live conversation? And the student says, well, one where I can't control what I say. I can't edit, I can't delete, I can't retouch my response. Whew, that's pretty deep. You see, human relationships are intended to be rich. They're intended to be messy. They're intended to be demanding. And technology has a way of trying to clean all that stuff up. It has a way of trying to soothe all that or smooth all that over. And what we do is we sacrifice connection for simple conversations at times. We think that by having a texting dialogue or by having, like a message or an email, that we've actually had conversation. And maybe we have had conversation on some level, but we've missed connection in those moments. There's a movement in her world that she's been studying and fascinated by lately, and it's this. She's been fascinated with the idea that there's, anyone familiar with Siri? You know what Siri is? There's this growing technological desire to make Siri a personal companion, not a portable device. They are recreating Siri so that they become this robot with humanity, that they have these connections with humanity. And she went on to tell about a story. They've been kind of testing this on the margin. They've been testing this on the people that are untouchable. They've been going to nursing homes, and they've recreated this AI robot that has facial expressions, that can look you in the eye when you have conversation with them. And she goes on to say that she came in and she did some research, or as she was doing the research, she sees this woman, elderly woman, and she's pouring her heart and soul out to this computer. And she's telling about this just ugly time in her life where she lost her child, where she lost a child to tragedy. And she's trying to connect with something that has no arc of humanity, has no point of reference for pain. But yet this computer was designed so that it might interact with her and that she might feel empathy. And in that moment, she said, I was instantly heartbroken that we've come to this point where we are longing so deeply for technology to fill the voids in our life. She said that we are designing technologies with the illusion of companionship without the demands of friendship. We're afraid of intimacy. We're afraid of intimacy. John talks about this. John talks about this. And I'm going to invite you to turn your Bibles real quick, if you will, to 2 John and 3 John. Now, as we turn to John, this idea and this concept of face-to-face interactions, I think is fascinating that it's scriptural, because I've said earlier, and I said last week, that the New Testament is concealed in the Old Testament, and the Old Testament is revealed in the New Testament. And from the beginning of time, God has been tapping on our hearts. He's been trying to get our attention for connection. He's been trying to connect with us on deeper levels that we can't even fathom. And so as he met with Moses, he also wants to meet with us, and those who follow Jesus and those who have a connection with Jesus should have a desire to connect with other people. So John is writing to a house church in Ephesus. And in this house church in Ephesus, just a little background so that we might understand what we're about to read. There's a crisis that just swept through Ephesus. And the church has split. And there's a group of people that were in the original house church that started to deny Jesus' deity and started to deny Jesus' identity. They said that Jesus was no longer the Son of God. They didn't think that he was Israel's promised Messiah. So they break away, and that group starts to stir trouble for the people who are meeting in Ephesus. So John's letters, 1st, 2nd, 3rd John, are written to the church group in Ephesus about this problem. And he's speaking to the original group, and he's saying, I want you to remain faithful. I want you to remain faithful. 2nd John is written specifically to a house church to warn about these deceivers, that they're in the area, and he calls them the Antichrist. That's what 2nd John's written about. 3rd John is actually written to a guy who's leading one of the house churches. His name is Gaius, and Gaius, John writes to him to say, hey, you need to be careful about this one guy by the name of Diotrephes. Diotrephes is a bad guy. He's stirring up trouble. We need to be careful with him. So 2nd and 3rd John are written specifically to these house churches with specific instructions. And at the end of these letters, look at what John says. Let's go to let's just look at verse 8, 2nd John. Watch out that you do not lose what you've worked for, but that you may be fully rewarded. And I think you ought to mark that. I'll come back to it here in a second. Watch out that you do not lose what you've worked for. Anyone who runs ahead and does not continue in the teaching of Christ does not have God. Whoever continues in the teaching has both the Father and the Son. If anyone comes to you and does not bring this teaching, don't take him into your house or welcome him in. Anyone who welcomes him shares in this guy's evil work. I have much to write to you, but I do not want to use paper and ink. And look at what John says. John says, instead, I hope to visit you and talk with you. There's that phrase again, face to face. 3 John writes to a specific church leader in the area of Ephesus. He says this, dear friends, verse 11, do not imitate what is evil, but what is good. Anyone who does what is good is from God. Anyone who does what is evil has not seen God. Demetrius is well spoken of by everyone, and even by the truth itself, we also speak well of him. And you know that our testimony is true. And then John says the same thing again, I have much to write to you, but I do not want to do so with pen and ink. I hope to see you soon so that we will talk, there's that phrase, face to face. There's something powerful about face-to-face. And I think what John saw and what John instinctively knew, what we might have at one time known but have forgotten or maybe compromised, is that when we gaze at each other's eyes, we have the potential to see each other's souls. Do you realize that? When you look at someone deep into their eyes, you might get a glimpse of who they really are. And that's why eye contact is so hard for us sometimes, because we don't want to be known. We don't want to be found out. We don't really want people to know us, because if people knew us, they might not like us. If people really knew what we were like, they probably wouldn't really like us at all, because we all wear these masks. And that eye-to-eye contact, that face-to-face communication, it destroys the mask. That's why it's, I think, a losing exercise. Or, a losing art. Take some time to look at these videos, but there's this interesting movement also where people are starting to see this, corporate worlds are starting to see this, the power of face-to-face communication is being compromised. And they have done these exercises where they'll bring people into a room and they'll just ask them a simple thing. We want you to stare at each other's eyes for 4 minutes. Don't say a word. Don't say a word to anyone. Just look at each other. If you get a chance, look up one of those videos sometime. It's amazing what happens to those people. Why? Because they're seeing eternity. Because they're seeing the soul. John's writing is all about love. In 1 John chapter 4, there's not going to be commentary on this. I'm going to ask you just to find application here. 1 John chapter 4, again, one of these letters that John writes about. 1 John it's a little different in its writing structure. It's not written to a specific person. We like linear books. We like linear things when we read, right? We like points A, B, C, and D. 1 John is not written linearly. It's written cyclically. Okay, it's written in circles and cycles. And basically, there are 3 main prominent themes that 1 John is trying to communicate to us. One is life, one is truth, and one is love. And so he uses hyperbole and he uses a lot of stark contrast. He talks about darkness and light. He talks about life and death. He talks about good and evil. But in 1 John chapter 4, look at what John says. And remember, the author of this is the one who Jesus loved. So love is a big deal for John. And John says to us, dear friends, let us love one another. I'm in verse 7. Love comes from God. Everyone who has been born of God and knows God, whoever does not love does not know God, because God is love. Now, this is how God showed us his love. He sent his one and only Son into the world that we might live through him. This is love. Not that we loved God, but that he loved us and sent his Son as an atoning sacrifice for our sins. Dear friends, since God so loved us, we ought also to love one another. No one has ever seen God, but if we love one another, I love this application. God lives in us and his love is made complete in us. That's why this face-to-face communication is so important. You get an opportunity to see God face-to-face through people. We know that we live in him and he in us because he has given us his Spirit. And we have seen and testified that the Father has sent his Son to be the Savior of the world. If anyone acknowledges Jesus is the Son of God, God lives in him and he in God. And so we know and rely on the love God has for us. God is love. Whoever lives in love lives in God and God in him. In this way, love is made complete among us, so that we might have confidence on the day of judgment. Because in this world we are like him. There is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love. We love because he first loved us. If anyone says, I love God, but you hate each other, you're a liar. For anyone who does not love his brother, who he has seen, cannot love God, who he has not seen. And he has given us this command: whoever loves God must also love his brother. Now, this is coming from a guy who is described as somebody who loved Jesus, right? And yet, this church in Ephesus really kind of had this problem. They had this struggle. And it wasn't just Ephesus, it was also the church in Corinth. They struggled really loving each other. They struggled really knowing each other. John writes all this stuff. Paul writes an entire letter to the Ephesian church about growing in their love with one another. So they had these great resources being poured into themselves. And yet in Revelation chapter 2, we find out that the thing that they had forgotten was what? Their first love. We run risk losing out on who Jesus is and losing out on the life that we're intended to live if we lose out on loving each other. Paul writes this. We can't talk about love without having this conversation. And it's 1 Corinthians 13. It's called the love chapter in the Bible for a reason, right? He says, love is patient, love is kind, love does not envy, it does not boast. We know all that stuff. But the verse that I'm really interested in 1 Corinthians 13 is not what love is and what love is not. I want you to jump down with me to 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 8. Love never fails. Where there are prophecies, they're going to cease. Where there are tongues, they're going to be stilled. Where there's knowledge, it's going to pass away. It's all garbage. Doesn't matter what you know. For we know in part and we prophesy in part. But when perfection comes, the imperfect disappears. And then Paul leans in and he says, listen, when I was a kid, I used to think like a kid. I thought like a kid. I acted like a kid. I behaved like a kid. But when I became an adult, when I became a man, I put away childish things. And then look at verse 12. Now we see but a poor reflection as in a mirror. Then when perfection comes, we shall see face to face. See, I know in part now, but eventually I'll know full. We get glimpses of Jesus when we see each other. And listen, when I see you and you see me, we find intimacy. When I see you and you see me, we find intimacy. Could you imagine a church that knew each other like that? Can you imagine how people would be attracted to that? People are desperate. People are lonely. We've been more connected and yet still all alone in our world, more so than we've ever been in our life. And you know why? It's because we don't take time to see with our ears. We don't take time to listen with our eyes. We don't know how to have face-to-face conversations. It could be different. It could start with you. Why don't you gaze at somebody? And why don't you find their soul? Father, I pray that you would help us know who we're called to be. In Jesus' name, amen.
Oh my goodness.
Stop to your marks, please. Be cool.
When I looked at you, it was just the day you were born.
It's like a history coming back from the time he was born till now.
지금도 생각하는 게 이제 시집 가는 그 생각만 하고 있어요, 사실. 결혼해도 같이 살아야지. 같이. Maybe next door. 그런 생각이 자식에게 더 많은 걸 해주고 싶은데 못 해주는 그런 필이 항상, 그런 마음이 항상 있습니다. 예.
I just think about the amount of sacrifices that she's made in making my life better.
This is something, a moment that I will not forget. Yeah. Thank you.